The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, 3.7.1. Causes of Memory. The king said, "In how many ways, Nagasena, does memory spring up?" "In 16 ways, O king. That is to say, by personal experience, as when the venerable Ananda, or the devoted woman Kujatara, or any others who had that power, called to mind their previous births, or by outward aid, as when others continue to remind one who is by nature forgetful, or by the impression made by the greatness of some occasion, as kings remember their coronation day, or as we remember the day of our conversion by the impression made by joy, as when one remembers that which gave him pleasure, or by the impression made by sorrow, as when one remembers that which pained him, or from similarity of appearance, as on seeing one like them we call to mind the mother or father or sister or brother, or on seeing a camel or an ox, or an ass we call to mind others like them, or by difference of appearance, as when we remember that such and such a color, sound, smell, taste, or touch belong to such and such a thing, or by the knowledge of speech, as when one who is by nature forgetful is reminded by others, and then himself remembers, or by a sign, as when we recognize a draft bullock by a brand mark or some other sign, or from effort to recollect, as when one by nature forgetful is made to recollect by being urged again and again. Try and think of it. Or by calculation, as when one knows by the training he has received in writing that such and such a letter ought to follow after such and such a one. Or by arithmetic, as when accountants do big sums by their knowledge of figures, or by learning by heart, as the repeaters of the scriptures by their skill in learning by heart recollects so much. Or by meditation, as when a bhikkhu calls to mind his temporary states in days gone by reference to a book, as when kings calling to mind a previous regulation say, "Bring the book here," and remind themselves out of that. Or by a pledge, as when at the sight of goods deposited a man recollects the circumstances under which they were pledged. Or by association, as when one remembers a thing because one has seen it, or a sound because one has heard it, or an odor because one has smelt it, or a touch because one has felt it, or a concept because one has perceived it. Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, 3.7.2. The Time of Death. The king said, "Your people say, Nagasena, that though a man should have lived 100 years in evil life, yet if at the moment of death, thoughts of the Buddha should enter his mind, he will be reborn among the gods. This I don't believe. And thus do they also say, by one case of destruction of life a man may be reborn in purgatory. That too I cannot believe. But tell me, O king, would even a tiny stone float on the water without a boat? Certainly not. Very well. But would not 100 cartloads of stones float on the water if they were loaded in a boat? Yes, they would float right enough. Well, good deeds are like the boat. Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, 3.7.3. Past Sorrows. The king said, "Do you recluses, Nagasena, strive after the removal of past sorrow?" "No." "What then? Is it future sorrow you strive to remove?" "No." "Present sorrow then?" "Not that either." "Then if it be neither past nor future, nor present sorrow that you strive to remove, whereunto is it that you strive?" "What are you asking, O king?" "That this sorrow should cease and no other sorrow should arise. That is what we strive after." "But Nagasena, is there now such a thing as future sorrow?" "No." "I grant that. Then you are mighty clever people to strive after the removal of that which does not exist. Has it ever happened to you, O king, that rival kings rose up against you as enemies and opponents?" "Yes, certainly." "Then you set to work, I suppose, to have moats dug and ramparts thrown up, and watchtowers erected, and strongholds built and stores of food collected?" "Not at all." all that had been prepared beforehand? Or you had yourself trained in the management of war elephants, and in horsemanship, and in the use of the war chariot, and in archery and fencing? Not at all. I had learnt all that before. But why? With the object of warding off future danger. How so? Is there such a thing now as future danger? No. I must grant that. Then you kings are mighty clever people to trouble yourselves about the warding off of that which does not exist. Give me a further illustration. Tell me, O king, is it when you are athirst that you set to work to have wells dug, or ponds hollowed out, or reservoirs formed, with the object of getting something to drink? Certainly not. All that has been prepared beforehand. But to what end? With the object of preventing future thirst. How so? Is there such a thing as future thirst? No, sir. So you are mighty clever people, O king, to take all that trouble to prevent the future thirst, which all the time does not exist. Give me a further illustration. Then the elder referred, as before, to the means people always took of warding against future hunger. And the king expressed his pleasure at the way in which the puzzle had been solved. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, 3.7.4. How far to heaven? The king said, How far is it, Nagasena, from here to the Brahma world? Very far is it, O king. If a rock, the size of an upper chamber, were to fall from there, it would take 4 months to reach the earth, though it came down 48,000 leagues each day and night. Good Nagasena, now do not your people say that a bhikkhu, who has the power of Iti and the mastery over his mind, can vanish from Jambudvipa, and appear in the Brahma world, as quickly as a strong man could stretch forth his bent-up arm, or bend it in again if it were stretched out? That is a saying I cannot believe. How is it possible that he could traverse so quickly so many hundreds of leagues? The elder replied, In what district, O king, were you born? There is an island called Alasanda. It was there I was born. And how far is Alasanda from here? About 200 leagues. Do you know for certain of any business you once did there and now recollect? Oh yes. So quickly, great king, have you gone about 200 leagues. Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, 3.7.5. How fast is rebirth? The king said, If one man, Nagasena, were to die here and be reborn in the Brahma world, and another were to die here and be reborn in Kashmir, which of the two would arrive first? Both together, O king. Give me an illustration. In what town, O king, were you born? There is a village called Kalasi. It was there I was born. And how far is Kalasi from here? About 200 leagues. How far is Kashmir from here? 12 leagues. Now, great king, think of Kalasi. I have done so. And now think of Kashmir. I have done so. Well, which did you think of quickest? Of each in the same time. Just so, great king. Would it take no longer to be reborn in the Brahma world than to be reborn in Kashmir? And tell me, O king, suppose 2 birds were flying, and one were to alight on a tall tree, and the other on a small shrub. If they settled both at the same moment, whose shadow would first fall to the ground? The 2 shadows would fall together. Just so, great king, in the case you put. Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, 3.7.6, Kinds of Wisdom. The king said, Venerable Nagasena, how many kinds of wisdom are there? 7, O king. And by how many kinds of wisdom does one become wise? By 1. That is to say, by the kind of wisdom called the investigation of the truth. Then why is it said there are 7? Tell me, O king, suppose a sword were lying in its sheath, and not taken in the hand, could it cut off anything you wanted to cut off with it? Certainly not. Just so, great king. By the other kinds of wisdom can nothing be understood without investigation of the truth. Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, 3.7.7, Is merit or demerit greater? The king said, Which, Nagasena, is there more of merit or demerit? Merit. But why? He who does wrong, O king, comes to feel remorse and acknowledges his evil doing. So demerit does not increase. But he who does well feels no remorse, and feeling no remorse gladness will spring up within him, and joy will arise to him thus gladdened, and so rejoicing all his frame will be at peace, and being thus at peace he will experience a blissful feeling of content, and in that bliss his heart will be at rest, and he whose heart is thus at rest knows things as they really are. For that reason merit increases. A man, for example, though his hands and feet are cut off, if he gave to the Blessed One merely a handful of lotuses, would not enter purgatory for 91 kalpas. That is why I said, O king, that there is more merit than demerit. Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, 3.7.8, Intentional Wrongdoing. The king said, Whose, Nagasena, is the greater demerit, his who sins consciously, or his who sins inadvertently? He who sins inadvertently, O king, has the greater demerit. In that case, reverend sir, we shall punish doubly any of our family or our court who do wrong unintentionally. But what do you think, O king? If one man were to seize hold intentionally of a fiery mass of metal glowing with heat, and another were to seize hold of it unintentionally, which would be more burnt? The one who did not know what he was doing. Well, it is just the same with the man who does wrong. Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, 3.7.9, Traveling. The king said, Is there any one, Nagasena, who can go with this bodily frame to Uttarakuru, or to the Brahma world, or to any other of the 4 great continents, into which the world is divided? Yes, there are such people. But how can they? Do you recollect, O king, having ever jumped a foot or 2 feet across the ground? Yes, Nagasena, I can jump 12 feet. But how? I fix my mind on the idea of alighting there, and at the moment of my determination my body comes to seem light to me. Just so, O king, can the bhikkhu, who has the power of iti, and has the mastery over his mind, when he has made his mind rise up to the occasion, travel through the sky by means of his mind. Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, March 7, 10 Long bones. The king said, Your people say there are bones even 100 leagues long. Now there is no tree even 100 leagues in length. How then can there be bones so long? But tell me, O king, have you not heard of fishes in the sea 500 leagues in length? Yes, I have heard of such. If so, could they not have bones 100 leagues long? Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, March 7, 11, Cessation of breathing. The king said, Your people, Nagasena, say that it is possible to suppress the inhaling and exhaling of one's breath. Yes, that can be done. But how? Tell me, O king, have you ever heard of a man snoring? Yes. Well, would not that sound stop if he bent his body? Yes. Then surely if that sound would stop at the mere bending of the body of one who is untrained alike in body, in conduct, in mind, and in wisdom. Why should it not be possible for the breathing of one trained in all these respects, and who has besides reached up to the fourth stage of the ecstatic contemplation, to be suppressed? Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, March 7, 12. Ocean. The king said, "There is the expression ocean, Nagasena. Why is the water called ocean?" The elder replied, "Because there is just as much salt as water, O king, and just as much water as salt. Therefore is it called ocean." Very good, Nagasena. Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, March 7, 13. The taste of salt. The king said, "Why, Nagasena, is the ocean all of one taste, the taste of salt? Because the water in it has stood so long, therefore it is all of one taste, the taste of salt." Very good, Nagasena. Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, March 7, 13. The taste of salt. The king said, "Why, Nagasena, is the ocean all of one taste, the taste of salt? Because the water in it has stood so long, therefore it is all of one taste, the taste of salt." Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, March 7, 15. Perception, reason, and the soul. The king said, "These three, Nagasena, perception and reason and the soul in a being, are they all different both in letter and in essence, or the same in essence differing only in the letter?" Recognition, O king, is the mark of perception, and discrimination of reason, and there is no such thing as a soul in beings. But if there be no such thing as a soul, what is it then which sees forms with the eye, and hears sounds with the ear, and smells odors with the nose, and tastes tastes with the tongue, and feels touch with the body, or perceives qualities with the mind? The elder replied, "If there be a soul distinct from the body, which does all this, then if the door of the eye were thrown down, if the eye were plucked out, could it stretch out its head, as it were, through the larger aperture and with greater range, see forms much more clearly than before? Could one hear sounds better if the cars were torn away, or smell better if the nose were cut off, or taste better if the tongue were pulled out, or feel touch better if the body were destroyed? Certainly not, sir. Then there can be no soul inside the body." Very good, Nagasena. The Questions of King Milinda, Book 3, Chapter 7, March 7, 16. A hard thing. The elder said, "A hard thing there is, O king, which the blessed one has done." And what is that? The fixing of all those mental conditions which depend on one organ of sense, telling us that such is contact, and such sensation, and such idea, and such intention, and such thought. Give me an illustration. Suppose, O king, a man were to wade down into the sea, and taking some water in the palm of his hand, were to taste it with his tongue. Would he distinguish whether it were water from the Ganges, or from the Jumna, or from the Asaravati, or from the Sarabu, or from the Mahi? Impossible, sir. More difficult than that, great king, is it to have distinguished between the mental conditions which follow on the exercise of any one of the organs of sense. Very good, Nagasena. Here ends the 7th chapter.